Good morning. This is Jim Blythe with Cedric White. We are the Veterans Impact Show. Joining me today, Miss Cindy Vann. Thank you. I am so pleased to bring her on in the book that she has written about PTSD. So stay with us. We're going to go live on our broadcast in just 10 seconds. This is Veterans Impact Show, and we are here for you. Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where our motto is Charlie Mike. Continue the mission. I'm your host, Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy Vietnam veteran and certified senior advisor. Join me as we feature veterans who continue the mission of leadership and commitment in our communities after serving our great nation. Why, you never know who you're going to meet or where we're going to go. So welcome aboard. Hey, great day to you. This is Jim Blythe with Cedric White. We are the Veterans Impact Show, and today we're bringing a very special program, a very heartfelt program. We're bringing Cindy Vann on to talk about PTSD in her book, PTSD. Cindy, tell us a little bit about your book real quick.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. It's an honor
You
to
bet.
be here between these two gentlemen, two Navy. I believe my husband's doing the happy dance up in heaven.
You bet. You bet.
I wrote the book to help me grieve after Phil had passed away. I thought putting it down and, writing would get the memories to become more alive with me so I could hold on to them. Never in my wildest dreams would I imagine where God has taken this book. It's been quite the adventure, to say the least.
All right, let's go back. Philip Vann was a U.S. Navy veteran. He was what we call a river rat in basically the PT boats in Vietnam in the Mekong Delta, which was probably one of the toughest, most dangerous duties you could have, even more so than landing on an aircraft carrier, because the life expectancy of most of those men was like 30 days.
Wow.
And they were all injured.
Yes.
I mean, I have known several. Rex King, my wife's ex-husband who passed away, was just a fabulous guy. I was so glad that to have him be a part of our family after Kay and I parted ways. We were very close. He was a river rat as well. Mm-hmm. And that basically is an endearing term, because what those guys did in going in the patrol boats and working with the various SEAL teams and other teams throughout the Mekong Delta was one of the most dangerous things in the world. And so he suffered tremendously as a result of his PTSD. So you grew up in New Jersey.
I'm a Jersey girl.
Jersey girl, yeah. And so you met this wonderful guy who was a sailor. Took a while, but you guys fell in love and you got married and started a family. You began to find out about his service and about his PTSD sometimes after you got married.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what you began to see with the PTSD.
Well, of course, Jim, when we were dating, he wanted to have this persona that he was this strong man, which he was. Right. He was a very strong man, but he hid the PTSD very well. And once we got married, I started seeing things that were alarming me. And the things was running away, isolation, because they, things around them start to disturb them and they get agitated, and then anger comes out. So I saw that, and then I saw smoking pot, and that wasn't enough to numb him. So he started drinking heavily, and then eventually went to cocaine and was shooting heroin in his arms. Because nothing numbed him enough to stop the nightmares. I mean, I saw the nightmares. They were horrible.
Oh, yeah. And his service in Vietnam, I read your book. Now, your book is available on your website, correct?
Yes, Yes.
So it's Cindy Vann, VANN.com,
Yes.
right? This is a heart-rending book that is just so amazing. Here is my copy. And I got to tell you, I finished reading it this morning because I just got it yesterday. And let me tell you something. This is a story about a lot of Vietnam veterans. This is a story about a lot of military veterans, Iraq, Afghanistan, and men who've served, and women with moral injury, PTSD. It's a horrible thing to have. So we're going to dig into a little bit about this. And Cindy, you being the spouse of somebody, you lived really hell on earth going through a lot of this stuff. So one of the things you talk about, he disappeared. He disappeared for weeks at a time, correct?
Yes.
He couldn't seem to keep a job.
No.
His moral compass, in terms of ethic and work, when he was sober, he was just fine. But when he went off the deep end, so what were, in your opinion, what were some of the things that triggered him? Noises, stress?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, I was his fourth wife. He had been married 3 times before me. And, I came from a very strict background. My dad was in the Marines, and I grew up Catholic, so I grew up very, very strict. And when I told my dad that, and my dad was, he adopted me. He was born in 1908, so you can imagine he saw the Great Depression, and being a Marine, he was just over the edge strict. But when I told him that I had met Phil and that he was a Vietnam veteran, it was like all hell broke loose in the house. He said, "No, you will not be with this man. This man is not good for you. If you marry him, you're going to suffer the rest of your life." That's what he told me.
Well, he wasn't far wrong.
Exactly.
But that was not the kind of really encouragement and love that you needed.
That's right.
And when you talk about being adopted, your mother had died, according to the book.
Yes.
And this man was really your uncle.
Yes. He was my biological dad's older brother.
And so you didn't have a real great relationship with your biological dad.
No.
And so you had a very loving relationship, but a very, very strict relationship with this man and your mother, your aunt, who was actually your mother.
Yes.
So you came from a totally, totally different world than Phil, who was your husband.
Yes.
Cedric, doing marriage counseling, how many times do you see that being a situation where you come from backgrounds that are so alien to each other?
Well, the wonderful thing about that, Jim, is that quite often people from different backgrounds are attracted to one another.
Yeah.
There's a level of novelty there, right? We talk about opposites attracting, right? Which is a wonderful thing until that very thing that attracted you to that person becomes the issue later on. And then there are always those things that are not discovered that are below the surface. When I listened to Cindy talk and when I did the research on her, I could only think about how there were things that, as they slowly crept to the surface, must have been truly almost terrifying.
Yes.
To the point to discover, oh, here I am. And now I think you had a child, and then, more children come along. And so I'm trying to be committed to a relationship, but yet and still there's so many undiscovered things that as we discover them, and the one question I have is, they didn't really truly understand PTSD at that time. So now your husband is dealing with something that isn't truly known. It's given who knows how many diagnoses, and how do you cope with that? He was trying to cope, and that had to be a struggle for you.
Absolutely. Well, that's why when I wrote the book and I titled it PTSD, I didn't want to put post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
I took it from the biblical view, the verse about passing through shadows of death.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought, maybe that alone, because a lot of people anchor
Mm-hmm.
things in their mind.
Yes.
You know, if you repetitively say, it's kind of like AA. Hi, my name is Cindy. I'm an
I'm an
alcoholic.
alcoholic. Right.
You're
Right.
anchoring
You're
that.
claiming that.
Yes.
Right.
And I've learned that from a sister in the Lord up in Minnesota, Marcia Felstead. She's a life coach,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what I would have done without her after Phil passed away. Matter of fact, I was so distraught, I even went in my car and I was going to turn my car on.
Mm.
And she's a prophetic woman too. And I was in my car and she called me.
Mm.
And I wasn't going to answer the phone, but I thought, you know what? It'll be the last time I'll talk to her. I'll answer the phone.
My God.
And she said, what are you doing? And I said, nothing. And she says, what are you doing? I said, I'm sitting in my car, and I started to cry. And she said, get out of that car now. And that's
Wow.
God. That's God.
What you
Yeah.
said, Cindy, right? I love that. Psalms 23:4, passing through.
Yes.
The problem is most people don't get that passing through.
Passing through.
They get
Yes.
stuck on the shadow of death part,
Yes.
not even understanding that it's a shadow of death. It's not even really death. It's a shadow of
Exactly.
it. But the battlefield is in the mind.
Yes.
And when you're struggling with PTSD from a psychological perspective, there's things in the mind that you get stuck in as opposed to passing through them.
Exactly.
And I love the fact that you did that. You didn't name it post-traumatic stress disorder,
Yes.
passing through the shadow of death. I love that.
Well, I love
Thank
the
you for
Lord,
that.
so I wanted to honor him with this book. And
That's wonderful.
what I did.
I'm telling you, you did. But I think this book needs to be read by everyone who's got PTSD or had anywhere close to it, as well as not only our military, but civilians
There you
who've been
go.
through things. But Cindy, most of all, your experience as a spouse is gut-wrenching.
Yes.
I mean, it just absolutely sticks in your mind and your heart, and you go, wow, she went through some horrible things. Having the police knock on your door, having to go to the police, say he's been gone for a couple of weeks, and then the ups and downs of that. When you found out that he was shooting heroin, when he was taking cocaine, how did that affect you?
I was scared to death because one of the times he ran away was probably about 3 weeks. He came home and the insides of his arms were just totally black
Mm.
and just had needle holes everywhere. And of course, I thought right away AIDS, you know, because he was sharing needles. And when you're in that state of mind, you don't think about, well, I need to use a clean needle. You just get what you get.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, so it was very, very, very scary. And I would sit with him and I'd say, why are you doing this? And he goes, you don't understand. And I tried to, but no, I didn't understand.
Well, I want people to go read this book because we're not going to take and explore everything. And there's some real surprises in there. But there was an experience that he had that I know several other men who had very similar experiences in Vietnam
Mm-hmm.
of a child carrying either a satchel charge or a grenade or a weapon. And I know that happened in Iraq. And I know that happened in Afghanistan.
Right.
And basically, that's got to be one of the most horrifying moral injury situations is you either take that child out
Right.
who's carrying that explosive or you're dead
You're dead.
and your whole team is dead.
Right.
Yes.
And that's an incomprehensible to us as Americans that somebody could do that.
That you would have to do that. You're
Yes.
forced to do that. You don't have a choice. It's either them or us, not
Yes.
just me, but it's us. You're protecting your entire team, and to have to make that decision. And again, as a police chaplain, we see more trauma laden first responders when there's a child involved.
Yes.
When they have to deal with the life of a child that's drowned, a child that's been hit by the firemen and the policemen are more affected by that as opposed to an adult. Because that, as you mentioned, Jim, moral injury, most people aren't even aware of moral injury. I had to make a moral decision to take the life of a child or have to deal with that. And it's very traumatic. Very.
I knew a Chief Petty Officer in the Navy. He came back aboard ship and he was white as a sheet. And I said, "My God, what happened to you?" He said, "A child stole my watch, ripped my watch off my arm, and was running towards that river there in Lagapo. And one of the Filipino police that was standing next to me pulled out a weapon and took that kid out."
Yep.
And he said, he then walked over, handed me back my watch, and he said, "I was so shaken, I just dropped the watch and walked away."
Right.
These kinds of things affect people.
Yes.
And even in the civilian world, we hear about them, we see them. People who are killed in automobile accidents, people who are killed in other things, are maimed or hurt. So it's not just the military.
Right.
But again, what we didn't know. Going back to World War II, they called it shell shock. Remember?
Mm-hmm. Right.
There was a scene in the movie Patton where he slaps this kid in a hospital, and Patton got really called on the carpet for it. But nobody understood.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we did not understand the effects of that. And so as we continue with this program, I'm going to talk about some of the things we found out about PTSD, what causes it, and how treatments and things are coming around to be able to help people. So please stay with us as we talk about this. But Cindy, was there one event more than anything that was so traumatic? Like, I think in your book you talk about you thought he had a heart attack, or there was some of these things you thought he showed up after being gone and you thought he was dead, walking dead. Mm-hmm. That's how bad it was.
Well, I lived in such fear that one of the times he was gone, hadn't heard from him. And of course, back then there was no cell phones or anything.
Right.
So it wasn't, and he was running on no money. So he didn't even have money for a phone booth. Mm. You know what I mean? He sold our car for drugs.
Mm.
Wow.
But this one particular time he was gone, and I had 3 children by that time. And we lived in a townhome, and one of the garage doors was kind of up about maybe 4 or 5 inches, and there was maggots coming out. And I was taking a walk with the children. So guess what came to my mind? Maybe he's dead in there.
Mm.
So I went to the leasing office and I asked I asked the leasing manager. I said, "Can you go in that garage and see why there's a bunch of maggots?" And my heart was just racing. So, and she knew Phil was missing. So we called the police. And the police came and they kept me on the side with the kids, and they opened it, and it was someone that had moved and there was trash in there. But that's how my mind was.
Oh man, these are the things that affect the family, that affect the people who have this terrible disease. So when we come back, we're going to continue with this conversation about PTSD. This is Veterans Impact Show. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. We're having a very important conversation about PTSD. And we've got Cindy Vann, and Cedric and I are really digging deep into this. We want you to stay with us. But before we get going, I need to do a couple of kind of public service announcements. I want to say thank you to DBTV Network for putting us on Amazon Fire and Roku and all they do for us. And Nathaniel Smith, Ascend Podcasting, what you do. My wife, Diane, what you do. She's the one putting everything on social media, Facebook. We're here for you. You want to contact us? Get a hold of us. You can call me anytime, 214-502-4600. And thank you, Joe in Jacksonville, who is always on with us. I just got to tell you, this is one of the most important conversations that I think we've ever had with Cindy Vann, who is the wife of a Navy PTSD victim. Now, what is PTSD? It is
where your brain has been impacted.
Yes.
Where you were impacted, you're delusional, you're trying to self-medicate, you use alcohol, you use drugs, you use other things. It is horrendous pain that was caused by horrendous events that you went through in your life at some point in time. And so in talking with Cindy, we're now hearing about some of the symptoms of that. What are some of the other things that you saw from Philip?
Well, couldn't hold on to a job. I mean, he would get hired, and because, to know him was to love him. So if he went on an interview.
Very charismatic guy.
Very charismatic.
Very, very smart.
Yes. He had a 160 IQ, and he was, not because he was my husband, but I have been told many times, very handsome man. And he just, when he would interview, he'd get hired. But maybe a week or so later, he'd be out the door because something would agitate him, whether it was somebody said something to him the wrong way, and he just could not hold on to a job. So that's a very significant thing with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Cindy, I remember as a child, there were a couple of guys in our neighborhood, who we called it shell shock. We knew they had been to Vietnam. We knew they had served. But as children, we didn't know. And our parents would stay away from that guy, and we would sort of meddle with him and run, and we'd laugh, not understanding that this person was literally suffering from what they had experienced in their duty of serving their country.
Yes.
And that for the Vietnam vets, we did a poor job of taking care of our guys when they returned.
Because we didn't know.
We didn't know.
That was the sad part about it.
Well, the other thing, Cedric, the political upheaval and the unrest and the protests.
Yes.
When I got off a plane, I went on a plane in San Francisco to fly down to San Diego to get discharged at 32nd Street. When I went through the airport in San Francisco, I'll never forget this blonde-headed kid with his long, dirty hair comes up to me screaming in my face, all kinds of names, baby killer, spit on my uniform. He didn't know who I was.
Right.
And I just turned around and walked away because, I was in shock, and I knew, I could take him out, but I wasn't going to.
Right.
Yes.
And the same thing happened later on. Excuse me, this morning allergies. The same thing happened in Los Angeles airport.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I got home, I took off my uniform. I put it in a box, and I said, no more.
Right.
And nobody knew that I had served.
Right.
Now, one of the things you mentioned, that Phil had been married 3 times. Mm-hmm. I didn't go through anything like what he went through because I was on aircraft carriers. But let me tell you, I look back now, and because some of my behavior, I was married 3 times before I met Diane. And it wasn't really until I had a transformational experience of coming to the Lord.
Yes.
And when you talk about being born again, most people go, no. No, there is a transformation that will happen. And it happened to me, and it changed me.
Yes.
So the best thing I ever did was go to boot camp because it changed me and made me a man. And the second one that I think in my life was when I went to the Lord, because it changed me to be a better man.
Yes.
Cedric, you saw some of this because you were in Navy as well. Mm-hmm. You were in during the Gulf War situations.
Yes, we saw a lot of it. And again, being on the ship, quite often you're removed, but not all the time. Mm-hmm. Or you're removed from the ground troops and the ground action that's going on. But yet and still you experience that. And what a lot of people don't understand is what people bring to the military, the experiences that they've had prior to coming to the military. And then when you truncate that, or it's conjuncted with the experiences that they have, it's all of these things, and they go unaddressed. Why? Because the individual, they're trying to handle it themselves. Right. They're trying to do their best. As you talked about your husband, Cindy, he was trying to cope. Mm-hmm. Those were coping mechanisms that he was trying to quieten the things that were in his head, that were trying to quieten the things that he was fearful of. didn't really want to share with anybody because what? It makes us look weak, as
Right.
you know, and that's just men and women. We're taught to be strong. We're taught to fight,
Yes.
right? But then there's times when we need help. And quite often we can't do it ourselves. I think the three of us have the same testimony in so much that it was the God in us that made a
That's
difference.
right.
And I love that part.
Absolutely. And I think also, for whatever reason that you have, you want to bury it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really want people to know, especially when we got treated the way we were treated.
Yes.
And when I went down, I immediately went back to college. I went down to the University of Texas, and I wore pressed blue jeans, and I wore a nice shirt and polished my shoes. I did not look like a college student at that time. And for me, that was such a huge difference. So when we come back, we're going to talk more about this, but we're going to get into some of the experiences that I've had in information. And I was hoping Dr. Ashmore would be able to join us, a PhD in neuroscience who has a great company called Symbios, that they're treating PTSD and using integrative medicine. So when we come back, we're going to talk more about that. We've talked about the symptoms. We've talked about the horror. Let's talk about how we change that. And first and foremost, in my opinion, is you've got to have religious faith.
Yes.
You've got to have an anchor. And I think that's important. So we're going to be right back after these words.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation.
Hey, this is Jim Blythe with Cedric White, my co-host, U.S. Navy veteran, gunner's mate,
That's
right?
That's right.
You got to blow things up with a cannon.
Lots of it.
Yeah.
Missiles, even bigger than a cannon. Missiles. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, well, I was naval aviation, and my pilots blew things up all over North Vietnam.
Yes.
Matter of fact, one of the things, I never felt like I really served because I was on a carrier.
Right.
But my squadron was the lead attack squadron in the Navy. We had 12 killed in action. We had 5 POWs.
Wow.
John McCain was one of my pilots. Dave Carey, who's now a very dear friend and that I do a Bible study with down in Georgetown, was one of my pilots and a POW. Those guys, how they survived and what they did is an amazing story as well. But I didn't think I'd really served.
Right.
Yet I went through a lot of stuff. We were always under threat from either patrol boats or MiGs coming out. Plus, you want to know what an aircraft carrier is? It's a moving bomb.
Yes, exactly.
You know, and you're flying off and on. Can you imagine DFW Airport and you bring it down to 1,100 feet by 205 feet?
I know.
And you're doing that kind of stuff?
Right.
And the amount of noise. And you know, on the ship from launching,
Right.
the amount of sound and noise. All of this, what does it do? It triggers things and chemicals in our body.
Yes.
You go back to ancient caveman, it was called fight or flight.
Yes.
Okay. Adrenaline.
Mm-hmm.
There are other chemicals that get produced in the body when you go through extreme stress.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
Just driving on the LBJ freeway is bad enough, you know. I love our new home in McKinney. I feel like we're out in the country and I don't have to deal with that all the time. But Cedric, that kind of stress, unless you've been there, you don't understand it, do you?
Right, right. It's hard. I'll never forget when I got out of the Navy and I was talking to 3 civilian friends of mine. We sang in a gospel quartet, right? And I got to talking about some of my experiences. And one of the guys who I really looked up to, he made a comment. He said, I'd never serve in the military. I'd never go and do this for our country. Mm-hmm. And it was at that time that I really got the grasp of how quite often people take for granted the freedoms that we have, and they don't even consider those who go and give their lives, those who pay the ultimate sacrifice for these things, and they have no clue as to what it takes for a person to do that day in and day out. So there's things that people will experience, and the body will react as if they are right there. We call it a memory echo, right? And you feel the exact same thing. Your mind feels as if you are right there.
Yes.
And to be able to cope with that, or if you are hiding that, if you're trying to suppress that, it becomes a danger. And most of the time, if it's not treated professionally, then they continue to go deeper and deeper, try to find different negative aspects to cope with it. And it's not a good thing.
Well, I talked to a doctor who was with the Chicago Burn Clinic, and he said the medical profession today is broken. And I know a lot of doctors are going to get their back up, me saying that, but all too often they are prescribing medications, drugs, oxycodone, opioids
Yes.
for pain, and they're treating the symptom, but they're really messing up the mind.
Yes.
They're really hurting the individual. You experienced that, Cindy.
Yes.
You saw what he was doing, and he went to the VA. And I'm going to tell you, the VA 15 years ago, 20 years ago, is not the VA we have today.
That's right.
But what did they do? What did they do to help him?
Prescribed him drugs.
Yeah.
And if he went off the deep end, when he would leave and the police would come and they'd put him in the ambulance and take him to a VA hospital, he'd be put in a locked psych ward. And they have this saying called the Thorazine shuffle, because they give you Thorazine and you don't know anyone, and it's sad.
Yeah. So for going back as far as in my current memory and talking about Vietnam, World War II, we didn't understand it, and B, we were doing the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's body is different.
Yes.
My body is different from yours. My body is different from hers. My body is different from Nathaniel's, and the chemistry in my body. So there are some people that are more affected
Yes.
by stress. They get PTS far more frequently, or it's far more powerful. And this is what I've been reading about.
Right. Jim, I would say that we have to be very mindful of trying to pigeonhole a person's
Yes.
trauma or stress level. What affects me wouldn't affect you at all,
Right.
and vice versa, right? And I may look down my nose, really? That bothers you? Well, yes, what's traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you, but yet and still it's traumatic. And if I carry that thing, that's why it's post-traumatic stress. I'm carrying that thing from my past into my present, which is causing me to not really be able to build into my future.
Okay, so what can be done now? Medical technologies, medical things have really evolved.
Mhm.
So let me tell you, about 3 years ago, I had a phone call and I talked to a guy who developed class 4 medical laser. What is that? It puts light energy into the body. Laser, we think of a laser as a cutting. There are tons, and you can look up class 4 medical lasers on the market, but this guy had been researching it and developing it over 25 years. And one of the things he found out was the wavelength of the energy into the body wasn't quite right, wasn't doing what it needed to. So he went to MIT and got the right wavelength, and he patented it.
Mm.
And Gary Bellinger with Phoenix Sterilase has this wonderful machine which you can basically isolate and treat. And what does it do? By putting light energy into the body, it increases blood flow and it increases oxygenation. And I have had a medical doctor stand there and look at me and say, no, it doesn't. You don't know what you're talking about. You're not a doctor.
Yes.
And this is part of the reaction you get from the medical community. And that's why the doctor in Chicago said the medical community is broken.
Yes.
I'm reminded of Louis Pasteur. The medical community way back then, when he was talking about pasteurization
Right.
and all,
Right.
they treated him the same way.
Yeah.
So let's then take a look with, here is something that can work.
Mhm.
Now, I'm not saying it's a cure, but it can work. And so I studied it. I actually bought one of these machines. I used it. What we found out was that it worked extremely well on PTSD. It worked extremely well on TBIs, and it worked extremely well on, believe it or not, mental health and schizophrenia. And one of the things we found out, and let me ask you a question. Did Phil sleep well at night?
No,
Not at all.
no.
Okay.
He stayed up all night.
Yeah. And so one of the problems with all of these things that are mental is you can't sleep. And then that makes you crazy.
Yes.
And that's not funny.
Right.
Yes.
So then what we found is when people were treated, they started sleeping during the night.
Yes.
The second thing I learned about, which was only about 6 or 7 months ago, was a vector machine, and with this wonderful Dr. Donna Ashmore in a company called Symbios, that is a community care provider through the VA. Her father was terribly injured. She found out about this doctor in Corpus Christi that had this machine, and they use microcurrents to basically stimulate all the meridians in acupuncture. Now, a lot of people go, well, I've heard of acupuncture. It works. Acupuncture is a 6,000 plus year old medical procedure that has been proven effective. And basically the VA, as part of its integrative system, is looking and using acupuncture. This is something that's coming into mainstream medicine today. So when you talk about integrative health, you're talking about acupuncture, you're talking about Tai Chi, you're talking about yoga, you're talking about stimulating areas in the body. When you increase blood flow. Now, we talked about the laser. The vector does this with neuroacupuncture. And Dr. Ashmore is a genius. She's a PhD. I wish she could come on. She's tied up in the clinic today. But she has talked and been on my program. You want to go back and see the program with Dr. Ashmore, it's going to blow your mind. Here is a treatment. I'm not saying it cures everything, but I have been treated. I was treated for my cancer. I treated for inside results. It improved my kidney function. It also increased blood flow and opened up my arteries in my heart so that I had an angiogram and they said, there's nothing wrong with you.
Wow.
Okay. So what we don't know is really relatively simple, but with a really complicated background, because these stresses and traumas create chemicals, create problems. I can't explain it. Dr. Ashmore can, other doctors can, but by increasing blood flow and oxygenation, it enables the body to rid itself of this stuff.
Yes.
It enables the body to knock out these inflammatories. Now, one of the other things when you started talking about Phil and using heroin and cocaine, I had a friend that was a recreational cocaine user, and I never touched the stuff. I was scared to death of it, and that was good for me. But he died a horrible death of cancer.
Wow.
You know why? Because cocaine destroys your immune system, and it has long-term effects. And so if you're a recreational cocaine user, you're killing yourself.
Yes.
And the hard way. It ain't going to be pretty.
Right.
So with you now have a situation where the body, the immune system is no longer working. So everything starts being a problem.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Now, Cindy, what I am so amazed at and just so thankful to know you were a covenant, yes, well, you still are a covenant wife, not a contractual wife, meaning you made a covenant to marry Phil, good little Catholic girl from Jersey. Okay? You stayed with Phil. You nursed Phil. You went through all this. You fought with the VA. You fought, and then you had the same problems with the medical community,
Yes.
the civilian medical community. You were that support. You were the thing that kept him going. That's an important thing for spouses to know. You can't give up. You've got to start finding things to help, right, Cedric?
I was going to ask Cindy, what would you say to a caregiver, not just a wife, but a husband who has a mate who's dealing with PTSD? You saw some extreme areas of it. We have some clients who deal with extreme levels of PTSD. And again, not all brought on by the military,
Right.
some prior to it. What would you say to that spouse that is dealing, they see their loved one dealing with this situation? What would you say to them?
Well, the Cindy Vann here, you need Jesus first of all.
Okay.
God is very, very important in a life, no matter who you are.
Right.
He is the one that makes the wrongs right. That's
So-
another thing that people go through is they well, we're all sinners, as you know,
Right.
but they'll do things that are just so outrageous, and then they can't forgive themselves.
Right.
You know, so Phil dealt with that as well. He
Mm.
had the survivor's guilt. He had, you know, after he had sobered up, he kept saying to me, that he was sorry to me for what he had done. And I said, first of all, God has forgiven you, and I've forgiven you.
Yes.
So I'm not saying it's for everyone as far as staying with a spouse, because it's hard to do.
Yes.
It's not an easy thing. But God gave me that perseverance through my upbringing, my faith. And I wasn't born again back then either. Okay. I was praying rosary beads and praying to Mary, and
Right.
there's nothing wrong with that. That gave me my foundation.
Yes.
Faith got me through.
And I ask you that because again, we have clients, and it's very important for this person who's excuse me, already dealing with a situation where maybe they're feeling abandoned,
Yes.
they're feeling hopeless. And then if I'm in a marital situation, now my spouse is looking to abandon me.
Yes.
That might be just that thing that pushes me over the edge. But sometimes it's that spouse. And as I did the research on you, I saw how you were there and you reassured your husband, and that made a difference.
Well, I think my strict upbringing was, my father always said, we are Americans. And the last four letters in that word is I can.
I can.
You do not say I can't do this.
Right.
And with God and I can,
Yes.
you can do anything.
All things are possible.
That's right.
You
That's
know,
right.
one of the other things that I found so amazing in your book, there were people that came to you. You had a police officer named Phil. You
Yes.
called him Uncle Phil.
Yes.
And what he did to
Yes.
help Phil, your husband, and your children. He showed up one Christmas with all the Christmas presents
Yes.
after Phil had gotten out.
Yes.
It's amazing how people come into your life that can be so helpful and supportive. And I want to kind of backtrack because we had one of the undersecretaries of the VA on talking about ending isolation
Yes.
and having a mentoring program and having a
Yes.
mentor. And Diane and I have talked a lot, and I went through Celebrate Recovery in the church. She was an instructor with Celebrate Recovery. She had a husband who died of alcohol, and he wasn't even military. He was an attorney, which is another form of abuse,
Yes.
trauma. That was a joke.
Yes.
But I got to tell you, you can do something about it. And having the faith and the determination to change and to help that person is what it's all about. And that's what I'm hearing from the VA today. That's what I'm hearing is the VA is talking about integrative health. That's what I'm hearing is they talking about ending isolation. They're not perfect. And I know there's a lot of people who don't like the VA, who are angry with the VA. And I got to tell you, get over it. Work with what you got, because you're not going to find something so much better in the civilian world.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
That's 100% correct.
So when we come back to finish up, we're going to be talking. I want to refer you to Cindy Vann, VANN.com, for a copy of this book. Let me see if I can get it right. There you go. PTSD. And what's really cool, Passing Through Shadows of Death.
Yes.
That is great. Thank you, Diane. And when we come back, Nathaniel, if you can put up Cindy's website, that'd be great. Also, I want to tell you, there is hope. There are organizations, there are companies. The VA is looking into and working with integrative health. We've got tools to help you. They're not perfect, not a cure, but there are tools to help you to do this and get through it. So this is a Veterans Impact Show. We're here for you to bring hope, to bring healing, and to bring help. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation.
Hey, this is Jim Blythe. My wife was just showing me something, and I want to say very, very thank you to Paula for commenting. This is a very, very important program because there are a lot of veterans, especially my age group, Vietnam, as well as some of yours from the Gulf Wars that are just, they're dying.
Yes.
Okay. And Cedric, you see it in the marriage counseling.
Yes, we see it in the marriage counseling, and we see it with other organizations that we work with where people are truly reaching out. People feel like they've been abandoned.
Yes.
But what you said a moment ago, Jim, is so key, and that is if we can end the isolation, if we can help them to understand that you're not alone in this. I love in your book, Cindy, that you talk about that, and you are making it known that, you know, that individual who will feel like they're the only ones out there. And that's what we have, a spiritual enemy that wants you to think that you're by yourself. And that's not the fact. But if we could come together as a body, as the body of Christ, and work together, there are resources. We do it here at Healing Light Hearts. We work with veterans. We work with first responders, trying to help them through, and with the understanding of, we're not going to tell you to get off of your medication, but we are going to tell you that the medication, while it's stabilizing you, there's a word of God and there's a power in the spirit that can help you grow beyond what you're dealing with.
Doctors will tell you that people of faith who exercise that praise have a 90+% better opportunity. Now, let's go back to just one aspect that I mentioned earlier. Thanks to Dr. Ashmore, thanks to Gary Bellinger, thanks to other doctors that I've talked to, Dr. Rhodes, who developed the vector. These chemical changes, and I'm going to call it that because I don't know enough to know, okay, have an impact on your mind and your body. Alcohol does the same thing. You don't have to have PTS to be an alcoholic. You don't have to have PTS, and yet you can get hooked on drugs. You can get messed up. The more potent the drug, heroin, morphine, the more damage you're going to do. Cocaine. People go, man, cocaine's great, Jimmy. I fly. No, it's going to kill you. And they don't understand that. One of the things is using these integrative medicine techniques that are available, whether it's a laser with Phoenix Theralase or with Symbiose, with the vector and the treatments. You've got to have somebody who knows how to use this. Symbiose does a lot of diagnostics. Gary's done a lot of research in using these things. And for instance, a lot of sports teams now have the laser. In using it, you can basically rebalance the chemicals, the hypothalamus. This is what Dee Dee is telling me. When you do that, though, you got to have more counseling. You've got to have more. You got to have follow-up. Once you go through this sort of situation, you're not cured. You have to have a maintenance program. And I also think you need to be involved in a support group, whether it's a 12-step program or a family program, the programs you put on, Cedric. This is so important. It becomes a total healing process. And if you don't do it, then you're going to just keep falling back. But getting the chemicals out of the body, getting the inflammation out of the body, overcoming, letting your body heal, and oxygenation in the body. Oxygenation that comes from blood flow. And if you're a doctor and you call me up and say, you don't know what you're talking about, you're right. But I've experienced it. And I've talked to the professionals who did develop it. And let me tell you something. If you're closed-minded and you're a doctor, then get out of the profession. Seriously, get out of the profession. If you're so closed-minded that you won't look to see things that will help people get off drugs, sleep, regain mental cognitive, Alzheimer's. I've seen it help Alzheimer's. I've seen it help, God grief, some of the people I've seen with Parkinson's been helped. If you don't look at it, if you don't research it, if you're just closed-minded and say, no, it doesn't do that, get out of the profession. Seriously, get out of the profession.
Well, I just wanted to come back to Cindy because we're coming down to the bottom of the hour. I love what you've done. I love what the message that you're getting out there, that I'm a firm believer. The scripture says, right, that what the enemy meant for bad, God can take that and use it for good, right? And sometimes we don't know why we're going through a situation. We don't know why we're suffering through. And sometimes it's not for us. It might be for you to experience it that will benefit generations.
That's right.
God will take you to places, but you have to be the one to go through it. Cindy, you were the one that went through this. The book is outstanding. I would definitely suggest for people to go out to Cindy Vann with 2 N's.com, get the book and apply it. There are things here. It's not just biblical beating you over the head with scriptures, but it's applicable things that you can apply to life.
Yes.
All right. This is so important. It's up. Please take a look at it. And I'm telling you, there is help. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. And I'm sorry if I'm a little bit over the top, but passion is important. All right. I want to wrap up the conversation and say, hey, if you haven't signed up for the PACT Act, if you haven't signed up for the VA and you are a veteran who qualifies, do it. Yes. I did it. Yes. It helped me.
I did it.
Cedric has done it. I've had many people do it, and we found out things we didn't know about ourselves medically. That's important. Never assume you know until you get some help. So I always close with a prayer, and I want to say, dear God in heaven, thank you for Cindy Vann, and thank you for Cedric White, and thank you for our veterans who are doing all they can to lead the way to help us. Thank you for putting a hedge of protection around our active duty military and our first responders who run into the fire instead of away from it. Lord God, we are so eternally grateful and thankful for all you do and for all of the things that you are showing us as ways to be healed, but you are the great healer. We thank you, Lord God. We thank you. And dear God, help us to bring this nation back together. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Amen.
Amen.
Dear Lord, what a great program we had. Thank you for being here with us. And you, thank you for being here with us. Share this.
Yes.
Share this with a family who needs help. This is Veterans Impact Show. We're here for you.